All right, guys, let's talk about the end of Western civilization. So, we just finished up the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn on December 21st. And as I'm speaking right now, it's December the 26th, the day after Christmas. So, I got some cool slides here to go through for you. And we're going to explain to you some of the events that happened at the last time Jupiter and Saturn were this close together about 400 years ago. And then we're going to extract the themes of the 20 years after the last event and then take those themes as how they developed a little bit over time over the last 400 years. And then what you can expect from today until the next few years of what will be completely destroyed by this conjunction that we're just going through. In the actually we felt the effects on as of March 2020, and we're probably going to be accelerating very quickly in the next. I say 2 months, very accelerated, and by next year everybody's going to be different. So that's kind of where we're headed here. So here are the slides we're going to go through as we go through this. So let's go to the prequel of events that happened a long time before the eclipse in 1623. So the prequel was almost 1,000 years ago, maybe. The East-West Schism of 1054. Okay, this was the Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic churches had different cultures and different theologies, and they developed into some schisms and fights, which split the churches apart back in 1054. The Filoque and the iconoclast controversies are the official, I guess, points of disagreement that split the Western Catholics from the Eastern Orthodox. Filioque, I think it is, and iconoclast. So you can look that up. So essentially, Christianity was more or less in communion across the world before 1054, and then after 1054, it split off between Eastern Europe and the East, and then the West. And what we're going to be focusing on specifically is the West, because we're all Westerners, and the West is what we are, and it's our heritage, our ancestors, and everything that's been debated over in the West the last 500 or so years is part of our cultural inheritance and our civilizational inheritance, and it actually defines Western civilization. So Western civilization more or less was launched during the Protestant Revolution, also known as the Protestant Reformation of 1517. If you recall, Martin Luther nailed like 95 theses or statements on his church door as a professor of theology in his local, I think, monastery it was, to start a debate. And this launched something bigger than he ever thought of, and it became the Protestant Revolution. And eventually he established the Lutheran Church, or what became the Lutheran Church, which became predominant among German and Scandinavian Protestants, more or less. Among the French people and the English or the United Kingdom folks, there was Jean Calvin, also known as John Calvin, and Calvinism. So this form of Protestantism was established in France, Switzerland, among the Dutch Protestants in the Netherlands, and among the English Protestants who were subsequently known as Puritans. Those who migrated to North America became known as both Puritans and Pilgrims, and eventually became Presbyterians of the modern day. So those are the prequel events to the Grand Conjunction of 1623. You got to have these in mind before you understand what was going on with the events during the Grand Conjunction of 1623. So let's jump to 1623, the Great Conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. So the goals of this section is to inspect the major events about 1 to 2 years before the conjunction, and then subsequently inspect all major historical events up to approximately 20 years after this conjunction, because this established the themes of the next 400 years, which we'll show to you, which we think are coming to an end now in 2020. All right, so that's kind of where we're at. So the historical themes around and after 1623, we're going to identify all major historical events that began at this great conjunction, and we're going to extract the historical themes that began at this time, and then we're going to make predictions about how these historical themes are coming to an end now in 2020, very quickly. All right. Let's see if I got this right. So as you were briefly introduced to the Protestant Revolution or the Protestant Reformation of Martin Luther, mainly Martin Luther and John Calvin, there were some other characters involved, where those were the two main branches of Protestantism at the beginning, and more or less, I mean, there were some branches later on, but those were the two most powerful branches of Protestantism, which was Lutheranism and Puritanism, or Calvinism. Puritanism is a branch of Calvinism. So these English Protestants came from East Anglia, England, for the most part. They migrated to New England, and what became the United States at the time. It was English British colonies. And I'm going to title this New England Puritan Insanity A slide. I do not have a good view of Puritanism or Calvinism, although it does have some positive traits. I think overall it's a net negative to the world, I believe personally. So you had the Puritan migration to New England between 1620 and 1640, roughly in the period of the Grand Conjunction of 1623. And a couple of years before, and subsequently about 20 years afterward, which would kind of sort of want to set the grand effects of a Grand Conjunction about 20 years after, up to 20 years afterward, typically. However, this was a major Grand Conjunction, and the thesis of this is that it lasted up until now, 2020. Massachusetts Bay Colony, as you will find out, that's the center of American power, which is Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts. So this colony was established at the time of this Grand Conjunction. I'm going to call this period within 20 years or so of 1623. The first governor of the Plymouth colony was William Bradford, a major name in America. You know, you'll see Bradfords and his descendants even today in major positions of American power. He was the guy who established the Mayflower Compact. They were supposed to land in Virginia, but the wind blew them to Plymouth Rock. So they's like, okay, what are we going to do here? Okay, let's get together and write down our quote-unquote Constitution or Magna Carta, which became the Mayflower Compact in the history of the founding of the United States. So that was William Bradford who established the Mayflower Compact. Okay, this next slide, New England Puritan Insanity B. Okay, during this time, like I said, within this 20-year period from 1623 was the establishment of Harvard College, which is now you know of as Harvard University. This is the foundation of the Ivy League, which is the ruling class of the world at the present time. Establishment of Massachusetts as the American center of power, and broadly speaking, New England and all the descendants of those who landed at Plymouth Rock and the subsequent pilgrims. You're also going to notice the Boston Latin School was established at this time. This was a boarding school requiring study of the classics. 4 years of Latin was required, and this was for the Brahmins, or the super upper class of Boston, the American elite, or the New England elite. John Winthrop, at this time, was the governor for 12 years of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He came up with the theme in his writings of the city upon a hill, or the shining city on a hill you notice in American tropes. Again, like I said, some of this has some positive influence, but I personally think it's a net negative, Puritanism and the New England society. Also, he was involved in something called the Antinomian controversy, which he thought that religious law was required for salvation. You know, these guys were, yeah, they had some positive things about them, but they had some really screwed up, totally wacko ideas compared to other people in Western civilization. So yeah, the Puritans, I think, were net negative, and I think now we're touching upon the net negative of the Puritans, which is the Antinomian controversy is one example. Religious law is required for salvation. So if you got religious law, you have to have religious priest that says what the law is, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to see this theme throughout Puritans, even after they became atheists later on, as for the most part. Okay, New England Puritan insanity C. So Roger Williams was a leader. He was the founder of Rhode Island. He was a Puritan founder of Rhode Island, but this cat was kicked out of Massachusetts Bay Colony for spreading new and dangerous ideas of religious liberty, separation of church and state, and abolitionism, anti-slavery. So they got pissed at him because he was coming up with new religious ideas, and they kicked him out. And so he went out and founded Rhode Island. So there you go. There's a history of New England. New Haven, Connecticut was also established by a guy named John Davenport, who was a Puritan pastor. The only reason why I put this note in there is because it's the foundations of the other Ivy League, Yale University, which is the other center of power from the Ivy League from New England. So yeah, it was Massachusetts area, but a little bit outside of Massachusetts is where Yale is in New Haven, Connecticut. Anne Hutchinson, for those of you who thought women were oppressed back then, well, they had positions of power. So she was a Puritan spiritual advisor in Massachusetts at the time. She was kicked out of the colony. She was kicked out of Massachusetts Bay Colony, tried and convicted for dangerous religious ideas. Can you believe? And then she moved to Rhode Island with the Roger Williams crowd briefly. And then they got kind of paranoid because Massachusetts Puritans had so much power that she moved into the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam or New Netherland, which is modern day New York near Bronx. She had a tragic ending because I think she was massacred by Indians. Again, this was the age of the frontier. Let's go over some of the trends in Europe that I think are important that we need to make sure we understand as a result of this Grand Conjunction. So René Descartes was the initiator of Western philosophy. He has the famous saying, "I think, therefore I am." Those of you who are into philosophy, you might remember the movie called The Matrix, which is an old philosophical theme of a mind in a vat, which I think René Descartes came up with. How do you know what's real? Because everything you know and you sense is in your mind. So how do you know that? How don't you know that your mind's not in a vat, a box with inputs to whatever? Which is roughly the theme of the Matrix movie. I think it was 1999 that movie came out. Of course, they had sequels. Johannes Kepler was a major astronomer who made very important calculations based on measurements, because that's about the time where they figured out how to build telescopes by advances in craftsmanship of optics. And so he was the guy who discovered a bunch of stuff with telescopes. He was the prequel to the great Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was born almost 20 years after this Grand Conjunction, January 4th, 1643. He's the most influential man in Western civilization, Isaac Newton, hands down. There's no one who has more influence in Western civilization than Isaac Newton. And if you're a student of history, you already know this. Galileo Galilei published his book called Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. Essentially, this is the book that got him branded as a heretic from the church authorities. So you're seeing a bunch of themes from this Grand Conjunction of 1623 and 20 years subsequent to it of some major, major events and influencers in Western civilization. Very, very important event. Trends in Europe B. Cardinal Richelieu. If you're more of an English pronunciation, you'll say Cardinal Richelieu. He was the prime minister, more or less, of France. He was responsible for centralization of state power to the monarch. Monarchs are equivalent to modern-day presidents, except they, in general, were not elected. Sometimes they were elected by nobles. Like in the United States nowadays, the president is formally elected by nobles called electors that are sent by the states. That's the formal. I mean, we do have elections, but formally, the monarch, i.e., the president, is chosen by the nobility, called the electors in the United States of America. I think monarchs in general were, born into it more or less in Europe, but I think there were some who might have been elected in some cases by the nobility. So Cardinal Richelieu was responsible mainly for a lot of centralization of the state to the monarch, and he founded the French Academy of Science. And of course, I think the British have, if I'm not mistaken, the Royal Society or something, or the Royal Academy of Sciences, something like that. But there was a lot of Academy of Science produced, and of course, France and England were the two major powers at the time. Jakob Böhme, or Jakob Böhme, the first German philosopher. He later influenced German idealism and German romanticism. Those of you who are familiar with Immanuel Kant, Schopenhauer, and Hegel will recognize Jakob Böhme as the prequel to those guys. If you're into philosophy. If you're not into philosophy, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. And I want to also talk about lesser known figures, but that had great influence in the trajectory of history for North America. Jean de Brébeuf was a French Jesuit missionary to Quebec. He was responsible for being a missionary to the Indians and learning their languages first, transcribing their languages, writing down their languages, as an effort to learn everything about them and then proselytize them as a missionary. So this was an interesting thing that the Jesuits did. And it is a theme that recurs throughout Western civilization as Westerners tried to infiltrate and teach in a condescending way native peoples, more or less. And this was it's a big theme now among the Ivy League as they rule the world from the United States of America by doing this exact same thing, say with African countries, Asian countries, Polynesian countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They've done the same thing in a secular way. They send out these quote-unquote missionaries that are extremely intelligent, capable of transcribing the cultures, the blah, blah, blah of everything to do with those cultures. Then they proselytize them into the Ivy League way of thinking. Samuel Champlain, or Samuel de Champlain, the founder of New France, which includes Quebec, Acadie, Louisiana Territory, for those of you who know a little bit about colonization of North America. If you're from Canada, you probably know more about this than typical Americans educated on history. This was France's answer and attempt to compete with the British colonies in North America. So there was New England, right? But there was also a New France briefly until the French lost the competition to the British. And then, of course, the British North Americans rebelled and basically went their own way with the establishment of the United States of America. So there was a strange trajectory of a couple of. Actually, the Netherlands with New Amsterdam and New York area also had a foothold in North America, but mainly it was England and France as the major powers that had a foothold and actually still has uh, descendants on the North American continent as a result of their colonies. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oliver Cromwell. Okay, so you remember whenever I was discussing some of the crazy Puritan stuff that went on in North America, but let's look at Europe. There was a dictator of England in the 16. Let's see what it was. Yeah, 1620s. I think. Did I get these dates right? In the 1620s, he was a Puritan dictator of England for about 5 years. He tried to establish a Puritan republic. He was very tolerant of, say, most Protestants, but he didn't give a damn for Catholics. So he had no tolerance for Catholics. I think he persecuted him, if I recall right. And he was responsible for the invasion of Ireland and the persecution of Catholics in Ireland, because that was the majority religion in Ireland, and creation of Northern Ireland. So if you ever heard of the big war between Irish Protestants and Catholics, well, blame this Puritan Oliver Cromwell guy for that crazy stuff. Those of you Irish probably know this history better than anybody, right? Okay, let's go on to modern Puritans, the deep state. So these guys developed into the deep state, the Ivy League colleges, as they became atheistic or secularized. Their descendants, were spread throughout the United States, North America, and all the institutions of the USA are pretty much dominated by either the descendants of the Puritans and the Pilgrims or those who were educated into the system of the Ivy League colleges. And that's a rough simplification, but that's the rough theme of how um, the deep state developed and where we're headed with this conjunction of 2020. So the geography of the descendants of the Puritans and the Pilgrims centered around New England, which they still do today. But there's some major migrations to northern Michigan, or should I say central Michigan, around the suburbs of, oh man, I forget the name of those towns. Those of you who are from Michigan know what I'm talking about. Minnesota. On the West Coast in Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, and down the West Coast in the San Francisco Bay Area, California. You can check cultural migration studies and find out more details about exactly where these descendants of the Puritans and the Pilgrims mainly migrated to. But you look at the electoral map, it's mainly the blue states or the blue cities on either coast up in the Great Lakes. You'll see the migrations, and there actually been some DNA studies, and it's been verified with DNA studies, the migration patterns and their origins of in New England among the Puritans and the Pilgrims. So, what are some of the Puritan themes based on the tulip doctrines? Look that up if you're interested in Puritan doctrines of what the hell do these people believe and why? Look up tulip or the 5 precepts of Calvinism. The chosen ones of God, i.e., unconditional election, to rule the world. We're the shining city on the hill. We are anointed of God. We elected of God to rule the world. We're the chosen ones. The other Puritan theme is a hatred of Scots-Irish culture. You recall Oliver Cromwell invaded Ireland, i.e., an Irish Celtic culture. They, in general, have a hatred of Celtic sort of cultures, which includes American quote-unquote rednecks, Scots-Irish. Rednecks in the USA are mainly descended from Scots-Irish migrants from the British Isles. Southerners, you'll hear that term, flyover country, etc., is all the same thing. They hate Scots-Irish culture. Why? Because they're the chosen ones as a result of perseverance of the saints and limited atonement doctrines of Puritanism. They believe God saved them and only them, and they don't question that they are the chosen ones of God to rule the world. So screw those Scots-Irish. As long as they stay quiet and don't cause too much trouble, they're okay. But when they cause trouble, we're going to hate them and call them rednecks and racists or whatever. That's essentially the Puritan attitude. In C, by irresistible grace, the Ivy League graduates are the priesthood of the ruling class across the world, replacing the Puritan church elders of New England. That is the deep state, my friends. Modern Puritans, the deep state of B. So secular strategies of these deep state agents, again, which are descendants of the Puritans and the Pilgrims. So let's say there is a secular strategy that they want to rule the world with. Well, they're going to show that, So continuing on, you're going to be required to show your unconditional election by confessing the doctrines of progressivism publicly. You are required to confess the doctrines associated with the sexual revolution or the cultural integration of rednecks with other non-Puritan cultures. Remember, Scots-Irish and normal black people are required to integrate with non-Puritan cultures. But the Puritan overlords from the Pilgrims and the Puritans are not required to integrate among non-Puritan cultures. So that's their hypocrisy of these deep state overlords. B, rednecks and others forced to conform to the Puritan overlords with compulsory education curriculum dictated by Ivy League priests from on high. Again, the Ivy League is the new priesthood. Anything that's not approved by the Ivy League is, against the so-called deep state church. C, now remember, publicly traded corporations have policies issued by the EEOC and other related agencies in other countries used to educate rednecks into progressive conformity. Examples are sensitivity training, sexual harassment training, and related satanic systems of forced indoctrination. D, the corporations use their human resources department as intelligence agents in collecting information about individual profiles. Oh, are they conforming to sensitivity training, sexual harassment training, and related satanic systems of forced indoctrination? Again, this is a secular religion with these secular high priests from on high, from the Ivy League, infiltrating the human resources departments of every major and minor corporation to make sure that the rednecks are conforming to the confession of the doctrines of progressivism. This is religious, secular religious implementation of colonization of the rednecks. The rednecks are being forced to hear this indoctrination from satanic Puritan progressivism. Yes, I make no bones about it, that it is satanic and it deserves to be destroyed. These people deserve to be destroyed. Absolutely destroyed. They are wicked. This is unadulterated evil. Modern Puritans, the deep state, C. Some of the intimidation strategies used against so-called rednecks in forcing them to conform to the Puritan deep state doctrines of progressivism. A, riots and social unrest in districts of resistant politicians. You see this everywhere in the United States since the 1960s and the 1950s, all the time. Riots come up to intimidate local resistant politicians into the satanic progressivism of the Ivy League. The next B, Lawsuits against companies with executives resistant to the Puritan overlords. These wicked people are going to sue the hell out of companies and bankrupt them until they conform to the wicked progressive doctrinaire religions of deep state Puritanism and Pilgrimism. The next one, C, is the social ostracization against the rednecks resisting the Puritan overlords. Accusations of intolerance, of racism, and intolerance from the Puritan overlords. Oh, you're a redneck. These words, intolerance and racism, don't mean what most people think they mean. This is code word for redneck. So when they call you intolerant or racist, they're not literally saying you hate minorities or don't like minorities. They're just calling you a redneck. But that's their dog whistle code word for redneck. They can't call you a redneck because then you'll know that they're insulting you. This is language among themselves where they self-identify and virtue signal that you are out of the group. If you're accused of intolerance or racism, you're basically called a redneck and not part of the Puritan pilgrim hierarchy of rulers and overlords and priests. That's what it is. If you're ever called a racist, don't say, oh, I got black friends. Don't ever say that because that's just dumb. You're just playing into their hands. You hit them back with an equal insult because they're not calling you literally a person who doesn't like minorities. They are basically calling you a redneck. The next way under D is withholding of public monies to agencies thought to be resistant to Puritan overlords. So a lot of research that goes on now is through foundations and corporate funding and dark investors who invest in publicly traded companies on Wall Street. And so withholding of these public monies or monies, so this can be done secretly in the dark, in the dark, off the books, for anybody resistant to the Puritan overlords. E, proliferation of illegal drugs and alcoholism among recalcitrant populations to destroy their economic and political power. A lot of American Indians, a lot of black people, African Americans, a lot of rednecks from the country know exactly what I'm talking about. Proliferation of illegal drugs and alcoholism among recalcitrant populations, i.e., non-Puritan populations, i.e., rednecks or anybody who's not a Puritan, to destroy their economic and political power. Illegal drugs is used for blackmail of individuals among these groups. Illegal drugs is used for blackmail and degenerating the population into degeneracy. Sexual degeneracy and drug degeneracy is used as a weapon of cultural imperialism from the Puritan overlords, i.e. the deep state. Okay, so why did I say all this stuff here, and what does it mean to you? And where we go from here, and what does it have to do with the conjunction of 2020? So all the themes that were started at the conjunction of 1623, which include colonization, Puritanism, modern science, and all that stuff, all of these are institutions that were established in the last 400 years. Okay? It is part of Western civilization. However, now it's been degenerated into garbage, decline of Western civilization. It's now all degenerate. Science really doesn't exist anymore as of the last 10 years. Neither does Western Christianity, degenerated into nothing, and government is almost non-existent. It's garbage now, which we have obviously seen for the so-called pandemic of 2020 and the riots. Essentially, government's gone. So the institutions that will be destroyed that were founded after the conjunction of 1623 are listed here in the final slide. So you will look after 2020, and you've already seen some of these trends in 2020, already these institutions have been more or less destroyed. They're going to be wiped off the face of the earth within the next probably couple of months, definitely in the next couple of years, and within 10 to 20 years, they won't be on Earth at all. They'll be wiped out, just like they wiped out the witches in the previous age, right? So New England and all its descendant institutions and systems will be destroyed. A, the Ivy League. All these Ivy League colleges will be destroyed. They are degenerate. They are stupid. They are quote unquote progressives who think they rule the world as the priests of the world. We're the Puritan priests that run the world through their degenerate and nasty satanic progressivism. The next one, systems of trust. These philanthropists from the late 1800s and early 1900s. All these foundations that fund research. You know what I'm talking about, the foundations. Go look them up. You guys know the names of these foundations. NGOs, non-government organizations, which are funded by the foundations or the elite departments of the U.S. government, like the State Department, which the elites call the Department of State. That's their term, the elite dog whistle term for the State Department. And international soft colonization. So you recall when I made the point about the Jesuit missionaries of Quebec going out and colonizing the Indians to convert them. The trusts, the NGOs, and the State Department are doing the exact same thing with international soft colonization of African peoples, Asian peoples, Polynesian peoples, everywhere. They're trying to do it in Russia. They're trying to do it in the Slavic countries. Russia's pushing back hard. They're trying to do it in China. China's pushing back, So this is international soft colonization. Exactly the same thing the Jesuits were trying to do with the Indians as an experiment. C, the religious impulse of tulips, which is Calvinism. A, total depravity. Oh, the human race is so depraved. Oh, we need God and the overlords of Puritanism to save our souls. Oh my God, where's the nearest Puritan preacher so I can save my soul from total depravity? Okay, that's A. B is unconditional election. The chosen ones from the Ivy League were chosen by God to rule the world, and they didn't even have a choice, In ruling the world, they were unconditionally elected to rule the world. Okay, C, limited atonement. I forgot the L there. Only the Puritan overlords are worthy of the atonement, are worthy of salvation. The rednecks are not worthy of salvation. Oh yeah, God might save a few rednecks, but they're not worthy because limited atonement only exists for the Ivy League and the Puritan overlords. Oh my God. Irresistible grace. The Puritan overlords did not have any choice. God forced them to rule the world. See that? The tulips, Calvinistic doctrine is the doctrine of the Ivy League and the ruling class of the United States. E, perseverance of the saints. The saints will persevere to the end. The saints will persevere until they die and go to heaven, or until they implement heaven on earth, or whatever the hell these bastards believe. These disgusting and sick Ivy League priests of world rulers and overlords. You see how sick Calvinism secularized is among these so-called progressives, these so-called ruling classes, these so-called priests, these degenerate devils. Okay, so let's go into science. What's going away aside from the New England Puritans, Calvinists, crazy Protestants, and the stupidity of the Ivy League progressives? Newtonian science worldview. Isaac Newton was the most influential man in Western civilization because the ruling class think they can rule the world or do science. All is required is equations. oh, okay, we got the entire physical world figured out with these equations. Here's a list of equations. Newton's first law, Newton's second law, Newton's third law. Okay, we understand the world. Culturally, that means all we need to rule the world is procedure. Procedure A, procedure B, procedure C, and make sure it works more or less among the rednecks, copy and paste it to the rest of the world. These equations or procedures are all we need to rule the physical world and rule human beings. Cartesian materialist philosophies, C. So Rene Descartes, more or less the mindset of philosophy is that the non-material world does not exist. Yeah, I know the Germans tried to rebel with idealism, and Berkeley of England tried to rebel with his version. But for the most part, philosophy doesn't accept the existence of a non-material existent. Again, culturally, we all understand, those of us who studied philosophy, that the concept of mind is non-material. The concept of mathematics is non-material. But the cultural influence is that the only thing that exists is the physical object world, the physical objects in the physical world. D, the other thing that's going to be destroyed for the conjunction of 2020 is the centralization of power. Remember, the ruling powers at the time of this conjunct was France, England, and the rising power was the Puritan overlords in America, the Calvinists, the Pilgrims, the Puritans. And the final thing that will be destroyed is the colonization of peoples to Western conformity, non-government organizations. I explained to you how the Jesuits in New France was colonizing the Indians. And the secular Puritan Calvinists nowadays are doing the same thing, trying to rule the world, colonizing the world with either Pilgrim and Puritan descendants or those who have been educated in the Ivy League of Puritanism. Secular Puritanism, which is commonly called progressivism or liberalism, modern liberalism, whatever the hell you call it, it's all Calvinism secularized. That's going away. Nobody's going to be colonizing non-Western people with this Ivy League cultural imperialism. And that's frankly Satanism, degenerating the local populations so they'll become under the control of the Puritan overlords. So that's coming to an end. So hopefully this has been educational to a lot of you guys, understanding what's going on in the background with my solid background and history to explain to you what the trends were around 1623 that got started that are being destroyed now in 2020. And all these institutions that will be destroyed, I personally think really quicker than anybody really thinks. But at least by 2025, they'll be destroyed. I personally think it's going to be much quicker because this is extremely powerful conjunction in the skies. But that's my opinion. And within 20 years, all this crap on this slide will be wiped off the face of the earth. There will be no Ivy League. There will be no NGOs. There will be no internationalization of soft colonization. There will be no scientific oligarchy like we have now with these nasty people that run the American Centers for Disease Control or whatever. You guys, I'm not going to mention the name specifically for censorship reasons, but you know who I'm talking about. These stupid so-called scientists, and all this science based on Cartesian material or materialism. Oh, the physical world is the only thing that exists. Oh, don't study spirituality because all that's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Oh my God! You see, all this stuff's going away for the age of Aquarius. You can't have centralization of power. I mentioned this in a previous lecture, but the reason you can't have centralization of power anymore is because of cryptocurrency. The centralization of power can only exist with the existence of central banks, which are going away. So there it is, guys. In in summary, appreciate you watching and listening to this. You guys take care out there. Till next time, have a good one. Goodbye. Mm-hmm.